ABC and CBS, controlling interest in the media mess. TV guy, bug-eyed monster with a video eye, selling me junk that I never want to buy. Won't you show me what I ought to see? How you suck me, how you fuck me till I can't be free. TV guy, 1,000 glassy smiles for 1 billion nightly viewers, selling dollar garbage in the media sewers. Sell England in America, America in France, sell you back your ass in a fancy pair of pants.
The following program is a realistic depiction of fictional events. None of what you're about to see is actually happening.
Good evening, I'm Frank Reynolds, and this is World News Tonight.
Coming up, police flood the subway tonight in another blitz on lawbreakers. But is it working?
A tragedy in Alabama raises the question, when should news people stop doing their job and start getting involved?
Thank you, Steve.
If it concerns you, it concerns us.
If it concerns us, we should actually pay some attention to them. This is Brian Winston. As you can see this evening, Paper Tiger Television is playing at being the news, which was why we fouled up at the beginning. I apologize for that. The news is the sharp end of television production. It's the thing that people worry about most, next, of course, to sex violence and kid vids. The news, however, is a very peculiar institution. It's full of astonishing conventions and constraints. It says it's going to tell us about the real world, but the way it does it is in a very strange, almost fairy tale sort of way. One of the things that news people are terribly good at, and which, as you've already seen this evening, we're not so hot at, is running down to videotape. I'm going to play you a bit of videotape, which I'm sure is quite familiar to you. Can we play it? Now stop it right there for a second. Let's just look at this, right? This is a very typical beginning of a news program. In fact, it contains, in the words March the 9th, 1983, almost the only hard fact you're likely to get in the 22 minutes you spend watching it. This also, unlike the sort of logos that seem to reflect the world and indicate that the news is dealing with the world, this opening title is absolutely honest. It's set in a TV control room. It tells you very firmly that the program we're about to watch has not very much to do with the world, but a hell of a lot to do with television. Let's see how it goes on.
Good evening, I'm Frank Reynolds, and this is World News Tonight. The scandal at the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, has taken a dramatic turn now. The agency's chief, Ann Gorsuch-Burford, has just resigned at the White House. Ann Compton, our White House correspondent, is there right now and has the story. Ann?
Frank, when the end came, it came very quickly. It was 4 o'clock this afternoon when Ann Gorsuch-Burford telephoned the White House, asked to see the president, and when she arrived here with her husband at about an hour later, she handed in her resignation. She met with President Reagan for about 25 minutes and with the White House counselor Ed Meese, who had been somewhat of her contact, her angel here at the White House. We are told that it was Ann Burford's own decision on whether to resign and whether to resign now, but clearly it came after the White House had worked out an acceptable deal with Congress to hand over all of the documents in the EPA controversy, not only the portions that were open and already offered, but the deleted portions, which now will be safely kept by the members of the committees on Capitol Hill, the very committees who had been complaining about the president's use of executive privilege. Mrs. Burford will not be thrown out of the administration altogether. After all, it was not her environmental views that had her in trouble. It was the political tangle around her agency. She will be found another job in the administration, and John Hernandez, her deputy, will become acting director of the EPA. Frank?
Frank?
This is Bettina Gregory. Burford's resignation was part of a deal worked out here on Capitol Hill. Late today, the White House agreed to turn over the documents that Congress has subpoenaed. All day long, White House counsel Fred Fielding came in and out of the office of Congressman John Dingell. But late this afternoon, Fielding agreed to turn over all EPA documents subpoenaed by the Dingell subcommittee. The agreement says the EPA will designate information it considers to be, quote, enforcement sensitive, and the committee will consider that information in executive session. The key point is the subcommittee will get to have, not just to see, these EPA documents. It means that Dingell won.
It is everything that the subcommittee has subpoenaed. And the EPA and the administration and Mr. Broyhill have, I think, brought us to a very...
These guys, yeah, I mean, I'm just fed up with these tall people, white people, talking to me. So let's leave them alone. Come back to me and I'll say something about this. The really interesting thing that's going on here is that, you know, the news as it happens, this was World News Tonight leaving their normal presentational techniques and doing something, you know, leading with a breaking story. It's terribly exciting when that sort of thing happens. The news is actually, essentially, people talking to you, like I'm talking to you now. It consists of a bunch of high-priced talent and a bunch of the rich and powerful in the world endlessly talking to camera or to each other. We actually eavesdrop on that, more or less. That's really one of the first points that one would want to make in a story like this, that it shows the limits of what's supposed to be an extremely visual medium. If you listen to television news professionals, they'll tell you how they're constantly busting a gut to get you these pictures. What do the pictures actually consist of? Well, as you could see in this particular example, they largely consist of people in close-ups talking to you. There's another point I want to make about doing the thing live as it happens. They turn out, like the people in this studio and myself, to be really mortals like the rest of us. They are actually not very good at talking off the top of their heads. They need scripts, they need organization, and when they don't have it, they get into terrible trouble and difficulties. The important thing, however, is that despite all of the talk, the protestations about the tyranny of the pictures, newsmen claim to be totally unbiased, totally uninvolved, absolutely accurate reporters of events, but occasionally they'll admit that they do love good pictures. The reason they make this admission is that they clearly don't. Let's roll the next bit of tape and I'll show you another example of what I mean. This comes from a rival news network. I don't know who the gentleman is, but I understand that he is, in fact, a pretty popular guy.
The Union today ordered the expulsion of an American diplomat assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, charging that he was a spy. The Russians said that he had been caught, quote, red-handed. He was identified as Richard W. Osborne, a first secretary in the embassy's economic section. He arrived in Moscow last August. The Soviet government newspaper Izvestia said Osborne was caught 3 days ago with sophisticated radio equipment able to transmit via a U.S. satellite. The U.S. State Department confirmed the expulsion but would not comment on the charge. The last known expulsion of a U.S. diplomat from Moscow was 5 years ago.
When you think that they've only got about 22 minutes to do this extremely visual, hectic news program, 74 seconds is an extraordinary and considerable length of time. Rather is very good at looking at the lens and talking compellingly for 74 seconds. In fact, he could probably talk for the whole 22 minutes without any difficulty. That's one reason why they pay him millions of dollars to do it. But there are a few things I want to draw your attention to. First of all, I want you to look at the body language. I mean, these guys are in a sort of kabuki theater situation. They're in a straitjacket. I mean, if he was to say, or any of the newscasters were to say, over now to Washington, you would get some sort of comic response. You can't do that. You have to sit here absolutely like a mummy with this desk, with all of the authority that the desk brings, and address this lens without blinking and tell the folks like it is. These are serious newsmen, and I'm not kidding about that. Their agenda is the agenda of the New York Times, not of the more rabid Rupert Murdoch-style sheets that are put out in this town. They actually take themselves seriously. They have an important social function to do. They've got to set the agenda for the nation. They can't lead off with, you know, blonde showgirl discovered in Midtown Flat, you know. They can't do that sort of thing, and indeed they tend not to. They lead with the serious stories. It can be inflation, it can be political stories. They might never have the hope in hell of getting a picture, but they're good. I beg your pardon, they're going to lead with it because that's what they're really concerned about. I don't want you to get the impression that they're without imagination, sensitivity, or a sense of right and wrong. Let's look at this Lex piece of tape. This is a really interesting piece of tape, which we just happened to stumble across.
A nationwide journalistic debate has arisen over when basic questions of humanity take precedence in covering a news story. What's causing this controversy is a piece of videotape aired on an Alabama television station which showed a man attempting to kill himself. Dennis Trout has that story.
This news tape is what the argument's all about. Some people in Jacksonville say its existence alone raises questions of journalistic ethics and basic humanitarian considerations. The tape shows Cecil Andrews, an unemployed roofer, trying to kill himself, allegedly to protest unemployment. He'd called WHMA-TV of Anniston.
I really don't want to be... Take it off the screen. I mean, this is really very interesting. This is total voyeuristic rubbish, and I don't want to be party to it. I just want to make a few points about it. You know why they blacked out the guy's head? It's because in case he tries it again, none of you will be able to recognize him and stop it. I mean, it's a real outrage. And they're really astonishing when they get onto this tack. I mean, the tape belongs to a television station. I don't know. Maybe they gave it to the networks. It's likely that they charged them for it. The whole nexus of money and access and all of these things is not mentioned in the story. The story is all to do with how this news crew watched the guys in the vague hope that the police would intervene and stop them. But what's not addressed in the news story here, in the ABC story, is what would have happened if the police had stopped them. They'd have got a terrific piece of tape. That's how they got into the bind in the first case. The fact that the poor character's deranged, that he's actually in real trouble, doesn't occur to any of these people. And privileging this story by putting it on the national news is entirely to do with the tyranny of pictures. That's where they're at. You know, in the final analysis, if they can fix something like this, then they're absolutely delighted and entirely happy to fix it. We have actually looked at this story very briefly because I actually don't see how I can morally replay it to you while making these charges against them. There's a real sense, though, that what's happening in these news programs all the time is that you're getting 22 minutes or whatever of stories that have been chosen according to an elaborately agreed agenda of what constitutes importance, what we should think is important. It's a way of holding the nation together. It's very interesting. They're in competition with each other, but they frequently run almost the same stories all the way down the bulletins. There's no real competition. There's agreement about what the nation should be thinking, what's important. The social agenda setting function is absolutely crucial. And, you know, at the end of these broadcasts, you know, they sort of shuffle their scripts, and after 22 minutes of complete mayhem, of dream logic, of guys trying to burn themselves, of the gold prices, they say, good night.
That's right, folks. Don't